Hey there, and thanks for joining me on this session where I'm going to be speaking to JeremyEnns, the founder of Counterweight Creative. Jeremy is going to be talking us through why podcasting is essential for wellness brands. And in this session, you're going to learn why podcasting is a must-have marketing tool for health and wellness experts, how to get started podcasting if you're overwhelmed by the gear, tech, and strategy, which I know a lot of us are, and finally, how podcasting can drive your entire content marketing system if done effectively. So this means recycling and remixing content, which cuts down on your workload. I love this session, and I know that you're going to love this session too. So let's let Jeremy take it away.
Hey there, everyone. Like Nicole mentioned, my name is JeremyEnns, and I am super excited to chat with you today about why podcasting should be at the center of your content strategy. And I think this is true for many businesses, but as we're going to talk about later on in this presentation, specifically for health and wellness-based businesses for some certain reasons. And so we're going to get into that in a little minute, a short minute. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit about one of my favorite podcasts. So this is a show called Akimbo, and it is from Seth Godin, who you are probably somewhat familiar with. He's a bit of a marketing luminary. And I had heard about Seth probably 2, 3, 4 years ago. Whenever I first got started in business, I had heard of his name, and almost everyone who you hear talk about him talks about him with a sort of sense of reverence. He's a bit of the original marketing guru, maybe not original since people have been marketing for longer than he's been around, but I was aware of him. I'd even read a couple of his books, but I'd never checked out his podcast. It had been running for probably 2 years until this past winter when I finally got curious and I was like, oh yeah, Seth has a podcast out there. I should probably check that out. I've liked what I've heard of his in the past, even though it had never really hooked me. So of course I looked up his episodes and I downloaded the first one. And by the end of that first episode, I was hooked. And so I went back to my podcast player and I basically downloaded all the episodes that he had. And there was over 100 plus episodes at the time. And so then, of course, I did the rational thing and I binged through all 100 plus of those episodes over like 6 weeks. And I was listening like on my walk to work. I was going for walks at lunch when I was listening so I could get in an episode then. On the walk home, I would go for long walks in the evening of like 1-2 hours long just so I could like be, getting my exercise in while I was listening to Akimbo. And this is the winter as well. This is like December, January. And I'm like just going outside, walking around, listening to my favorite podcast. I was listening at home. Basically every spare minute that I had was devoted to listening to this podcast because I was so obsessed. Until eventually, sadly, I reached the end of the podcast. I caught up, and now I was going to have to wait a week between listening to episodes, and this wasn't quite enough to fill my craving. So luckily for me, Seth has written 20-something books. And so once I caught up, of course, I then went on Audible and I bought immediately 8 of his audiobooks. And I started binging through all those. I continued my habit of listening to his content at basically every chance I could get. And so I was catching up with those and I was still listening to the weekly episodes that were coming out. And I heard on one of them that he was running an online conference. So I attended that conference, signed up for that. That was a small, maybe $100, something like that. And the first time I'd spent money with him, other than the probably now close to 10 books I bought over my lifetime as a consumer of his. I mean, that's doing pretty good already. So I signed up for the conference, had an awesome time at that, met some cool people and learned a lot of interesting stuff. Still listening to the podcast, still reading his books, and I still wanted more. So of course, then I signed up for one of his programs. And I think this was like a $500 program. And as soon as the gate opened on it, I was like waiting. I knew the day that it was going to open up. And this was called the Story Skills Workshop. And so I knew it was going to open up on, I think it was a Tuesday. And like immediately I was like the first one in line to buy. And there was another program actually that was going on at the same time, or maybe 2 weeks later it launched. And I had to kind of talk myself down from going through both these programs at the same time. And I knew that the time commitment might be like an hour a day on each of them. And so I was like, okay, there's no way I'm going to actually do 2 hours a day on these courses, plus all my work, plus, everything else that I'm doing. Okay, I'm just going to do the one for now. But I put the second one on my calendar for later in the year when it was going to open up again. And this is another like $500 program here. But that wasn't it. because I kept listening to the podcast and I found out, oh, there's all these other programs. So in addition to the one I already had on my calendar, I added two more to my calendar. And actually, when I say one calendar, I added them to my physical planner that I have here and my work calendar and my personal calendar because I did not want to miss the sign up dates for each of these programs. And then, of course, just to make sure that if all three of my calendars failed, I still would be notified. I signed up with two different email addresses to his list, my primary work address and my personal address. And as you can tell, I was a bit obsessed, a bit of a fanatic, but I did not want to miss out on these programs. I was like, just waiting to like give him all my money. And I didn't put this on my my calendar, but there's another $4,000 program that I know I will sign up for if once I have the bandwidth for that at some point, hopefully within the next year. I am like super eager to free up my schedule so I can just give him my money and go through the program. So I tell you this story because this is, to me, the power of podcasting. I was aware of Seth before. I had read his books even, but it wasn't until I got into his podcast and really dove deep into his content that I was converted from a casual observer and someone who even looked up to him, respected him, enjoyed what he shared, to become a clearly raving super fan. So a bit more about me. Like we mentioned, my name is JeremyEnns, and I run a podcast production and marketing agency called Counterweight Creative, where we help health and wellness experts become the authority in their space by leveraging the power of podcasting, like we just discussed here. So we've been working with over a dozen wellness experts over the past 4 years, and I was doing the math fairly recently, and I realized that we had helped them rack up over 20 million downloads, which I had not really realized it was that much until I actually started going through and counting them up one by one. Actually, I didn't do them one by one. I looked at the totals. It's much quicker that way, and was able to see this, and I was like, "Whoa, that's kind of crazy. That's a pretty big deal." And a lot of these people they kind of come across the whole spectrum. There's some people who have tens of thousands of downloads, and some people who have 2-3 million downloads just on their own. And the thing that I found is that it doesn't always take a ton of downloads to have a huge impact. Some of our most financially successful clients don't have a ton of downloads, but they have high ticket products that really speak and resonate with a small niche group of people. And that is enough to help them really power their whole business. And so over these past 4 years, working with all these clients, we've had the opportunity to kind of peek inside their marketing systems. A lot of times we are working alongside them and helping out with the marketing side of things. And other times we just handle kind of the audio editing and the production side of things as they have their own marketing teams at work. But it has been enlightening to see, how each of these different experts are able to use podcasting to a lot of times drive their entire marketing systems. So when we're looking at the goal of your marketing for any type of business, you can, draw up however granular a funnel that you want. You can have, a 10-step funnel to measure how people are working their way through your marketing and your content. But I like to think of it as 4 basic steps here that apply to pretty much every business. And so the first one is exposure. Before we can get clients or get people to sign up to work with us, we need to get in front of them. They need to be aware that we exist. From the exposure level, we want to be able to attract them back to us where, maybe they heard us on another podcast or they saw a post of ours on social media. They felt some attraction to it. They aligned with, the content that we're putting out, our values, our worldview, what it is we have to say. So they come back to our content ecosystem, whether that's our podcast, blog, YouTube channel, social media accounts, whatever that might be. And then once we have them there, our number one goal, the primary thing we should be working towards, is building trust with them. We want to be able to show up consistently and help them start seeing results from our free content. And once they have built up that trust that, we can we can kind of walk the walk as well as talk the talk, and that our content is actually useful and valuable and gets them results and help them move closer to the goal that they have, that is when they are going to convert and end up buying from us. And so often when it comes to marketing, you hear people talking about conversion rates, which, are essential, maybe not essential, they are important, I will say. They are more important for maybe e-commerce type stores if you have I don't necessarily want to say a commodity, but a product where there are many competitors, perhaps, and it's a quick and easy kind of checkout system, conversion rates are much more important. But when it comes to, personal services, working one-on-one with, coaches, consultants, things like that, I think the conversion rates matter a lot less. And if we can really focus on the exposure, attraction, and trust, these first three here, the conversion is really going to take care of itself. So if we look back at the story that I've shared, this is not a unique story. I had became aware of Seth and I was attracted to his content. It took me a while to find my way to his podcast, but once I did, I binged through dozens of hours of content over a very short amount of time, and that trust, went through the roof because of that. And after that, of course, I converted and signed up for one of his programs, went to the conference, and put all these other programs on my calendar. And now I'm just waiting, lined up to give him money in the future. And so I think the great thing about podcasting is that it gives us a system to really get in front of people and gain visibility and create that attraction. And so a lot of times what we've seen is that by being smart about the content you're creating with your podcast, you can spin that off into all of this various content that helps, you can put out on social media, you can put out on different content platforms like YouTube and Facebook Lives and all these things just from recording a weekly podcast episode. And so by pulling all that other content out of it, you're able to actually get this visibility and create that attraction and that alignment with people. And then it pulls them back to the podcast. And once they're there, I am of the belief that podcasting is the single best platform in which to build trust with your audience. And so when you think about what I have just talked about, I was listening probably, a couple hours a day to Seth Godin's podcast. And like I said, dozens of hours over the course of a couple of months. Probably most people are not reading your blog for 2 or 3 hours a day. And they probably aren't watching your YouTube channel for 2 or 3 hours a day. Might happen. Podcasting is one of the benefits. It's just a hugely versatile medium. So I was not sitting in front of my computer. I was out like walking and doing other things while I was listening to all this. So there's just so many more opportunities to listen to audio content.
It's a
And
really great point, Jeremy. I just wanted to pause you for a second to just,
yeah,
as I'm listening, something that I'm thinking about is one, what you're saying of just like when we're listening to a podcast, one, the amount of hours that you can spend listening to a podcast, two, that you take it out into your life. You're not just sitting there at your computer. And then the thing that was really making me think about is it feels like listening to someone, having headphones, having their voice in our ears is one of the more intimate things that you can do. Like it feels like
yes.
it's someone can really feel like a friend, like a confidant, versus watching I'm just thinking about myself, like watching a YouTube video, which feels very separate from me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching it, I'm sitting here in front of the laptop versus listening. I mean, I'd like to do, especially now that we're kind of in COVID times, like doing voice messages with friends,
Mm-hmm.
and how
Yep.
much more you feel you can connect with someone just by having but their voice is literally in your earbuds, in your ears. I mean, really, it doesn't get more connected and intimate from at that point,
Yeah.
so being able to connect with people in that way is very powerful. I just wanted to kind of underline what you said a few times because that's really stuck out to me.
Yeah. I love that you use the word intimate because that's something that I keep coming back to when I think about my own listening habits, but also talking to other podcast listeners and hosts. And it really is like, if you listen to a show, 1 or 2 hours a day, how many people in your life do you spend that much time like that close in your
Yeah,
ear?
yeah.
For a lot of people, if you spend 2 hours a day listening to a podcast, if you're super busy, you might not even talk to your partner that much every single day. And so listening to podcasts, the relationship with a podcast host is definitely one of the more intimate mediums out there. And I think that you touched on it as well. Like there's something about the human voice. And I think with YouTube, to do YouTube really well, you kind of need to, it needs to be fairly produced. And nobody wants to watch a raw YouTube recording. There's a lot of cutting and it's like punchy and to the point. Whereas podcasting feels very organic and you can actually like get into depth and things. And there's more of a sense of like YouTube feels polished. It feels like the best version of someone. Whereas podcasting often feels like the authentic, like real version of that person. And yes, some people do have the personas that they kind of step into when they're, interviewing people or whatever, but it feels you can actually get a sense of who this person is and like what they believe and what they value through, the questions they ask on their podcast, the content they share, and just like listening to their voice is something that, I think we don't always, it's not something that we can qualitatively rate people on and attribute to trust, but I think you can sense in someone's voice, like, I like this person and I trust this person and I feel like I know them. So I think
Yeah.
that is why, yeah,
No, I like
podcasting
what
is
you're
just such a
saying.
great
It's just
medium.
what it's reminding me of is because I've done both in the past for my business, YouTube and podcasting. And just as a bootstrapper, and
Mm-hmm.
someone was kind of teaching myself how to do every part of it, from whether it's editing the podcast and getting it up on
Yeah.
iTunes to versus the YouTube was for sure more time intensive. I needed
Yeah.
more gear. I needed to have more polished editing skills and more polished camera skills. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to share with you that when I was podcasting, now we're going back like 5 or 6 years, I used to sit in my closet with the lavalier
Yeah.
mic. That's all
Yeah.
I did. I sat in my
Uh-huh.
closet so I could have this quiet space without a lot of sound bouncing around, but I'd be like in amongst my
Mm-hmm.
clothes just talking. Like it was like so, the process of getting a product that sounded really good and was the quality that I wanted was so much easier with podcasting than it ever was or ever could be with YouTube.
Yeah.
And YouTube is fun too. I'm not knocking it. It's a fun channel to play with, but I just wanted to like, reiterate what you were saying in terms of like what you need. I'm sure you're going to get into that in a little bit, like what we need to get started podcasting. But I just wanted to share my own little 2 cents around like podcasting for me was the much easier medium to get into, to enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
and have a better quality product for sure.
Yeah. And I think kind of it's important to think too of like what type of content you're doing, because YouTube is, obviously if there's things that you're doing that are visual, YouTube's probably much better.
Yeah.
That said, I do know multiple people who have podcasts that are based around design, which you'd think should be visual, but depending on what type of content you're talking about, podcasting can be a valid or even better option sometimes. And I think a lot of times with podcasting, there are so many different types of shows that you could run, but probably people aren't going to watch an hour long or hour and a half long, even YouTube conversation between two people that is more conceptual or theoretical or getting into deeper topics. A lot of times I know my own YouTube viewing habits are more like, I want to get an answer to something, I want to learn something quickly, I want the how-tos, and I want to, potentially be entertained as well. Whereas podcasting, I want to be like immersed in a topic and like really feel like I get to know it. And it's like a slower kind of process a lot of times.
Yeah.
So I think that depending on what kind of content you're looking to share and build an audience around, that can have some impact on which channel to go to.
Great.
So my experience with Akimbo, my kind of fanaticism is maybe extreme, but it is not entirely unique. There are more and more people who are becoming weekly podcast listeners as podcasting is spreading. And most people, the average podcaster, the average person who listens to podcasting every single week listens to 6 hours a week, which is quite a lot of time to be spending with a specific medium. And a lot of people, almost every podcast listener that I've talked to at some point has gone back to the start of some podcast and just started working their way through the entire back catalog. So that is not something that is unique to me or crazy podcast fanatics. That's something that when people find something that resonates with them, they will go back and start listening through everything because they love the content so much. So I want to share a little bit about one of our clients, Jen. So she is a clinical nutritionist who had an existing podcast that wasn't really getting her the results she was after. This was in the kind of dietary nutrition niche, and she'd been doing the show for a while, and she'd actually had quite a bit of success, and she'd actually built up a decent sized audience, both in podcast listeners, email list, social media following. But what she was finding was that so many people who were listening to her show were being pushed to her guests. And so her guests would come on and pitch their products and services, and her listeners would all go buy their stuff, but they weren't really converting for her. So she was starting a new show in a different niche, kind of starting from scratch. And she reached out to discuss strategy and the production side of things. And she basically really was, she had this whole existing audience, but not many of the people who were interested in the old niche were going to be interested in the new one. So she was really kind of starting from scratch. Her email list didn't really transfer over, social media following, not so much. And of course, with the podcast, this was an entirely new feed. She had no subscribers, no downloads, anything like that. So we worked together and came up with a format designed to showcase her as the expert, which included extensive listener Q&A sections in every episode where she really got to shine as kind of the authority and the expert and build that trust with those listeners. And so about a year after launching her show, we were on a call and she kind of complained to me almost that she'd raised her prices 3 times in the past year and she still had more people than she could possibly serve lined up out her door. And so she was kind of frustrated that she couldn't help these people who she knew she could help. She had the knowledge and the expertise to help, but she worked one-on-one with people and in small groups and just couldn't actually get all these people through the door. And so she was now kind of being forced to scale her business and bring on other people, and this terrible problem that nobody would want. And what's more, of course, she surveyed her people when they found her, and she said that 80% of her clients said that they got to know about her through her podcast. And when she was working one-on-one with them, many of them would quote directly from her show, and they'd say, in episode number, 83, you mentioned that this might be the reason for this. Could that be what I'm dealing with? And she was like, well, that's kind of creepy that they're like quoting me verbatim back to me, and like they know that well the specific episodes. But I think that probably for most of us, this is a problem that we would very much welcome to have in our business. More people than we can possibly serve, and that level of like knowledge of the content. So I think the things that put a lot of people off from getting started podcasting are the perceived difficulty. There is, yes, this kind of audio equipment kind of side of things where none of us, we might be computer savvy, but then when it comes to physical microphones and cords and all these audio interfaces and all the stuff that we don't even know what we need, that can feel scary. But it can also sound expensive. But for anyone watching this, you can record fantastic sounding audio quality at home for less than $250. One of the mics I recommend most often is, I think, $75, and it sounds fantastic. And if you want to go really high end, you can spend probably $500 and get a like really pro sounding setup. And it is not that difficult to learn. Once you learn it once, you're kind of set for life. And so that hurdle is,
Can I
if you're
ask you
willing
what
to
the
put.
$75 one is? I'm sure people.
So that is, yep, that is the Audio Technica ATR 2100X. Whole bunch of numbers and letters there, but
ATRX. Did I get that right?
ATR-2100X.
I love how all these like cameras and audio things is just like the most complicated names that you could possibly come up with things. Every time, like my webcam is like the Logitech C920X1 4.5.
I got the same one, I think.
Yeah, I just added a bunch of, that I added a bunch of at the end of that. I made it more difficult. It's the C920. It's lovely. Everybody wants a webcam. I don't know how you love it. I love it. It was like $100 or under $100. And if you're looking to do, even everybody's doing like their Zoom things. If there's a lot of like people on the conference that are like switching to telemedicine or working with clients, one-on-one, it just makes the picture really clear. It makes your skin tone look really nice. It just softens things up, and you don't have to have this complicated setup. But yeah, that's what I'm working with right here. So we got the Audio Technica. I'm going to put that in the notes down below this video if people are interested in checking that one out too.
Yeah. And I was skeptical about the camera. I was starting to do a course and doing more video type stuff. And so it's like, okay, well, it's a MacBook I have. Like, sure, they make such a big deal about their camera. Surely, like, it's a good camera. And then I like bought this one and looked at the side-by-side comparison, and I was like, oh, it is not that good.
I know.
So,
and for women,
women
going on camera, when you're worried about, your skin and stuff, I'm not a big makeup person.
Are you saying I'm not worried about my skin?
you got the beard, so half of your skin you have to worry about. But just for the ladies who are watching this, I think that for those of you who are into makeup, this camera I noticed can kind of, it's like a very subtle Snapchat filter, is this how I would describe it. It just like makes things look really good. So I'll put the link to the camera down below too, so people can check that out.
Awesome. All right. So audio gear is not that big a deal. That mic is a USB mic. It plugs right into your USB port, like your hard drive, like anything else that you use with your computer, and you're pretty much good to go. So you don't need to worry about the audio side of things. Then there's all that tech backend setup with getting it out to all the different podcast directories, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, all the different apps. But there are more and more resources coming out like every single day. I get like podcasting is blowing up so much right now. I'm subscribed to all these different podcast newsletters, and every week there's like 3 or 4 or 5 different companies who are like, hey, we have this new tool to help you do this, and hey, we have this new tool to help you do this. And so like everything is getting so much easier, especially than it was even a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years ago. Things are so much easier today that almost every platform out there has tons of like great resources in training you how to set everything up, if not just kind of streamlining the process entirely for you. So you set up your kind of podcast hosting account where your audio files live, and they just send it everywhere else automatically. It does not need to be super complicated. And so I think the biggest thing is that people, it's almost a mindset thing where you make it out to be a much bigger problem than it actually is. And then you get into it and you buy your mic and you plug it in, you're like, oh, okay, I don't know why I thought this was difficult. And then you get your podcast set up online and you're like, okay, that, maybe took a little bit of figuring out, but I had all these walkthroughs from whatever service I was using. Now that's done once and I can just forget about it. And your first interview, you're going to be like, okay, I don't know how to do this, but like we're doing this call on Zoom. A lot of our clients use Zoom to record their podcast interviews. So many people are familiar with it. I would say there are some better options out there as well. If you want to get a little more technical, stuff that you might not be as familiar with, I would recommend one called Squadcast, which is going to deliver higher quality audio for remote interviews. So you can check out that one. But you can use Zoom too, which is probably something you're familiar with. And so all of these things that you make out to be this huge deal are actually like, oh, I already know how to do this. This was actually way easier than I thought and cheaper than I thought. And all these other things I maybe took a little bit of work to figure out once, and I don't need to worry about them again. So really you can get set up on the technical side of things and overcome all the things that I find really stop people up in like a day or a weekend of effort and a little bit of education around that. So there is that I think is why so more people don't get involved with podcasting earlier. There's so many people who I talk to on sales calls or who have inquiries who are like, yeah, I've been thinking about doing this for 2 years, but it just always seemed difficult. I put it off, and now I'm like finally ready to get started. And so I would say that now is really one of the best times to get started. Podcast, like I said, is really booming. And I know for a lot of people, it feels like it's already like oversaturated. There's too many people, you're not going to get any visibility. And I think to some extent, it is going to be harder to build an audience today than it was 6, 7, 8 years ago when there were not that many shows. And if you could be like the one show on weight loss or something like that. Today, there are probably, a dozen shows, or actually for weight loss, there's probably many more than that. But I think that the great thing to go alongside this is as there are more shows, there are also way more people who are discovering podcasting for the first time and who are coming over to the platform. And this is really being led by a lot of, big companies and these big podcast networks who are putting out, really high quality content and really more entertaining style shows. And that is bringing more and more people over to the podcasting platform. So while there are more shows that are starting, there are also way more people who are showing up. And so now is a great time to actually start up a show and get in front of those people. Now, I talked about at the start that podcasting is specifically a great asset for health and wellness people and marketers and business owners. And that is because I think that, especially for people in the health and wellness industry, our customers and clients need to trust us before they sign up to work with us. When it comes to our health, each and every one of us, we want to know that we resonate with the people who we're buying their products, we're taking their advice, we're going through their programs, whatever it is. We need that level of trust, and trust is important for any kind of buying decision. We obviously, even from little widgets or whatever it is, we trust that it's going to do the job that we buy for it. And then when it comes to spending hundreds or thousands of dollars on programs, specifically those that target our health and hopefully are going to help us lead better, healthier lives, there is an additional, much higher level of trust there. And that is why I think that podcasting is just so important for people in the health and wellness space to really focus on and really build up that level of trust with their audience. So if you are interested in getting started, we have a fantastic podcast launch roadmap that you can get at counterweightcreative.co/wellness summit. And on that page, I'll also have a link if you want to just set up a quick call, 15-minute call to chat with me, talk about, whether podcasting is a good fit for your business, what I might do if I were you to get started. You can sign up for a short call there. And also I'll have my contact information, email address, and anything else you need to know about me. And so you can get in touch. I love nerding out about podcasting. I could probably go on this call just speaking by myself without any prompting from Nicole for the next 24 hours. So if you'd like to get a little piece of that private just for you, feel free to send me an email, or I'd love to jump on a call and chat more. So that's counterweightcreative.co/wellness summit.
Great.
And that's all I got.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. If you can stop sharing your screen. Cool. So I just have really just one question for you. That was such a great presentation. I have tons of notes for myself as well. I want to get started with the podcast too. I've done it in the past. It was really fun. I'd love to do it again, especially for the business venture that I'm doing right now. But that's just a side note. And another side note that I made a note of is I just bought myself 2 Seth Godin books this week.
You better watch what you're going
I
to
know.
turn into me next.
And I haven't even listened to the podcast yet. So, and it just made me think, is Seth the person that talks about the concept of 1,000 true fans or super fans? Is that him or is it somebody else?
So he talks about it a lot, but it's from Kevin Kelly, who's the founding editor of Wired, I think.
Yes. And so for
Seth
you guys
talks about it all the
listening,
time.
it's just this concept of you can build a really kick-ass business just on having 1,000. And I don't know if they put a number to it, if it's you can build $1 million business or you can build a multiple six. I can't remember. Do you remember if it was about $1 or is it more just an ethos around building your business?
Yeah. The way Seth talks about it, I actually haven't read Kevin Kelly's original article, but Seth talks about it so much that he basically quotes it, that you can make a living off of 1,000 true fans. So a lot of times, a lot of his audience, and I think maybe Kevin Kelly's as well, is people, creatives, artists, and things like that. So the example that's often used is a band. And so if you have 1,000 people who will buy everything you put out, all the limited edition vinyls, every album, they go to your show when you're in town, that's enough people to make a good living off of as a creative. And I was actually just listening to an episode yesterday, I think it was the latest episode. And he was talking about how, if you want to build a $10 million business and scale, you probably need more than 1,000 people to do that, but you can make a comfortable living off of 1,000 people who are like me, who will put your products release dates on the calendar and wait for those. And so that's kind of what they mean by true fans. It's people who will line up and buy everything that you put out.
Cool. And that's awesome and I know not everybody listening is in this position. I think there's a lot of clinicians who just want to work, one-on-one with people, but that it's especially great for creatives who have lots of ideas and that you could kind of steadily create, whether it's on digital programs or things like that, or memberships or a mastermind or things like that. If you could roll out lots of ideas over the next 5-10 years, then it makes a lot of sense to focus on building those relationships with super fans who are going to consume everything that you put out, because it is a lot easier to sell someone to somebody you've already sold something to than to try to acquire a new client, a new patient. So I just wanted to take a little detour over there because you reminded, you're one of the super fans. And I was just I think I can stop saying that. You are one of the people.
I think I am. Yeah.
But my question is, so I actually had the question about podcasting and being overcrowded, and you kind of covered that a little bit. But if we know that podcasting is pretty crowded right now, especially it's probably rare to find a niche right now where you're the first person or you're even the first of 3 people to come up with a podcast. Can you talk us through just 1 or 2 tips that people can do to stand out in a crowded marketplace?
Yeah. So this is actually something that I've taken from Seth, obviously, most of my marketing.
I should have got Seth on the summit.
Yeah, maybe you should have. Maybe for the next summit you will. And if you can't, I'll come back on and I'll have listened to 100 more of his podcasts and have more to share. But and I've kind of applied it to the way we teach podcasting and podcast marketing, but is around niching, and like a lot of people talk about this, but the way that it's kind of come to me and really crystallized for me is go so narrow on your niche when you're starting out that you could conceivably be the best in the world for that group of people.
Yes.
So when it comes to podcasting, there are a lot of podcast agencies out there, and I don't know that we are at this level yet, but I think that we can become the best possible podcast production and marketing agency for the wellness industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is our like niche. And I don't know that, we are there yet. I don't know how to you even judge that. I don't know of anybody else who specifically, markets to those people or seeks to work with those people. But for me, we already have, 70% of our clients are in the health and wellness industry. So we're able to make connections among those people, and we understand like the types of products they sell and what the competition is and all these different things. So it makes sense to niche into that. And I feel like that is an area, if we go narrower, that we potentially could become the best podcast production agency for those people. And so I think depending on what you're talking about, you might have to go narrower and narrower and narrower. You could talk about weight loss as a whole, and you are not going to be the best weight loss person talking about weight loss in the world. I don't know how you would even quantify that. So you might go to like, okay, well, it's just going to be for women then. I'm going to teach weight loss for women. And then you could niche down and say like, okay, well, women who are between 25 and 35.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might go even narrower, and it could be like regional. It could be, there are so many different factors that you can start like narrowing down until you're at a point where you're like, okay, this is somewhere where I could become the very best person to go to for these people. And nobody ever wants to do this. And I didn't want to
It feels
niche. Like nobody likes
counterintuitive.
niching. Yeah.
Mostly everybody, it's timeless advice that works for every single part of your business, and so it's like it's not surprising to me that it would also work in podcasting. But it is
Yeah.
counterintuitive. It's even in myself, it's hard. You just like, you want to kind of like, no, why would I make the pool of people I'm talking to smaller and smaller and smaller? It feels so counterintuitive to business, but it's actually I had Dr. Krista Burns come on yesterday, and she's from the American Posture Institute, and she was talking about her main point of her talk was like the most important thing that she had done, the most impactful thing in her business was getting very specific about her
Yeah.
niche.
Yeah.
And it's like it's probably something that will be said in most of these interviews. It's just like
Yeah.
like pick your niche, like find it and then dial it in one more time, and then dial it in one more time. So I love what you're saying, and I think it's applicable to all aspects of business and marketing for sure.
Yeah. And I think like this is true for most marketing, especially for people like us who have small businesses, especially working online and building audiences around content. Like podcasting and content in general most effectively spreads by people, like one person telling another person. And
Mm-hmm.
so I always like to, really just like hone this way down. And so we're talking about who can we be the best in the world for, and then find your first 10 fans. Like if you can find 10 people who will tell 3 other people about it, like you're gold. If you can start building up those people. And so I think like we always want to start off speaking to everyone, and you are just going to get lost in the noise. But if you can speak like so intimately and so specifically to a small group of people, like those are the people who are going to be like, whoa, this was like created just for me, and I know someone else just like me who would benefit from this. And so they start telling that person, and the cycle kind of continues. And it's not fast. It's not going to happen in like a month or 2 months or 3 months. Like I find that most people we work with, even people who have existing audiences, oftentimes the podcast doesn't really start like catching on, and the snowball really gets rolling down the hill for like a year. And so I think you kind of have to take a long view. But I think so often people look for the shortcuts, and then you like try all these different shortcuts, and then you're 2 years later and you still haven't actually made any progress. Whereas if you had actually like committed to one thing and done it really well, and like showed up consistently and built up that audience, then 2 years later you have people like me who have like listened through all your episodes and are like lining up to buy everything that you put out there. So I think that that's worth remembering as well.
Yeah, I love that. And if I could just, add my 2 cents too about podcasting, the podcast that I put out 5 or 6 years ago, still, I mean, I very rarely go and check the
Yep.
stats, but people are still listening.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is not something that I've thought about for years, and people still find me through that podcast. They still find episodes. They still find someone that I interviewed, and they reach
Mm-hmm.
out and ask questions. And so, and unfortunately at that point I didn't have a good funnel around, and
Yeah.
it's not an industry or a top. It was like that was called The Spirited Entrepreneur. And it was back in the day. So I used to be a yoga teacher, and I was sort of talking about the intersection between like spirituality and business. And I was more into like astrology. And so it's not really topics that I'm interested in anymore. But if I had a robust funnel around it, I guarantee that I would still be making some money off of that podcast. And it would be totally passive income that I wouldn't even have to manage. I pay, I think, $7 a month for Libsyn just so I can, have the podcast still there and get some stats. I could pay less than that if I didn't want the stats, but I like checking in every couple months and be like, what? 50,000 downloads? What? That's cumulative. That's not monthly, but still, I mean, people find it and people listen. So, I love podcasts. I think most people do. I love the work that you're doing. I hope that people, grab the link. It will be down below the video so they can get that content from you and get on those calls and learn how to, you use podcasting to elevate their business, and become the expert in their niche. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for being on with us. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This has been fun.
Yeah, bye everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you being here with us. I hope that in this session you learned something impactful and something powerful that's going to help transform your business. Before I leave, I just wanted to let you know that this session was sponsored by my business, Brand Better, branding, websites, funnels, and more for the wellness entrepreneur. If you want to learn more about my business, you can head over to brandbetter.online to find out more. And I also wanted to make sure to invite you to join me on Friday, the last day of the conference, July 3rd, for a half-day masterclass where I'm going to help you put this all together, the Wellness Business Accelerator, and make sure that we take all of the great concepts that you just learned in all of these amazing presentations with these great rockstar speakers and make a plan for your business. So it's going to be live and interactive. Check out your email to make sure what time it is on Friday, but it is going to be a live half-day masterclass. So I hope that you join me. I'd love to see you there. We're going to get some really good work done and make sure that we take all of these concepts and they're not just these, just sit and watch and take some notes and not actually employ any of these strategies. I want to make sure that these are real actionable things that you put in your business. So join me there on Friday. Go over and check out brandbetter.online to learn more about my business. And I'll see you on the next interview. Bye.